Opposition, Right Honourable Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the government announced the next stage of easing lockdown restrictions. If that plan's to work, and we want it to work, we need an effective track, trace and isolate system. The Prime Minister promised a world-beating system would be in place by the 1st of June. The latest figures from yesterday's press conference, hosted by the Prime Minister, showed that 33,000 people are estimated to have COVID-19 in England. The latest track, trace and isolate figures show that just over 10,000 people with COVID-19 were reached and asked to provide contact details. I do recognise the hard work that's gone into this, but if 2/3 of those with COVID-19 are not being reached and asked to provide contact details, there's a big problem, isn't there?
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, I think that the Right Honourable Gentleman has been stunned by the success of the test and trace operation, and contrary to his prognostications of gloom, it has got up and running, I think, much faster than the doubters expected. And they are getting it done. Dido Harding and her team have recruited 25,000 people, and so far they have identified and contacted 87,000 people who have voluntarily agreed to self-isolate to stop the disease from spreading. Now, I don't think he would have predicted that a few weeks ago, and I think he should pay tribute now to Dido and her team for what they're doing.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister just hasn't addressed the question I put to him. I wasn't asking about those that have gone into the system, the 10,000, or who's been contacted. I was asking about the 2/3 of those with COVID-19, of the 33,000 who weren't reached. This is a big gap, and the Prime Minister risks making the mistakes he made at the beginning of the pandemic, brushing aside challenge, dashing forward, not estimating properly the risks. If 2/3 of those with COVID-19 are not being contacted, that is a big problem. Because if we don't get track, trace and isolate properly running, we can't open the economy, we can't prevent infection disease, spreading. So let me ask a question in a different way. What's the government's strategy for closing the gap between the number of people with COVID-19 and those going into the system, not what happens to those that go into the system?
Speaker, I hesitate to accuse the Right Honourable Gentleman of obscurantism. He's misleading on the key point. The number of people with COVID, of course, is an estimate in this country. Mr. Speaker, he's inadvertently misleading.
Prime Minister, one of us is going to have to give way. It'll have to be you. Prime Minister, obviously nobody misleads, and no honourable member ever would, whichever side they're from. Prime Minister.
He's inadvertently, I think, giving a false impression of what test and trace is doing. The 33,000 cases in the country is, of course, an estimate. What NHS test and trace is doing is contacting the vast majority of those who test positive and their own contacts and getting them to self-isolate. And it is a formidable achievement, Mr. Speaker. And yesterday, the Right Honourable Gentleman was kind enough actually to say that he supported our policy and supported our programme. I seem to remember him saying that loud and clear yesterday. Today, and as I say, I understand the constraints of the profession in which he used to work. I know how it works. Yesterday and today, he seems to be yo-yoing back into a position of opposition. Which is it? Is he supporting what we're doing, or is he against it?
Mr. Speaker, the figures I gave that the Prime Minister says are inadvertently misleading are the slide at his press conference yesterday and the slide at the government's press conference last week, the latest figures. They're the two figures. Mr. Speaker, I do support the next stage of the operation, but the Prime Minister is wrong to reject challenge. 65,000 people have lost their lives because of COVID-19. The Prime Minister should welcome challenge that could save lives rather than complaining about it. Another risk to this plan is if local councils don't have the powers and resources to implement local lockdowns. There's a report today that 8 out of 10 councils face bankruptcy or cutting services. Many of those are in the North East and Midlands, whereas the Prime Minister knows the worst affected areas for COVID-19. And the real concern amongst council leaders is that they don't have the powers or guidance to implement lockdowns quickly if needed. The Conservative leader of Oxfordshire Council said, "I'd be interested for central government to confirm what is meant by local lockdown, including clear guidance as to those powers and what's expected of us." Can the Prime Minister tell us when local authorities will get the guidance that they need?
Mr. Speaker, everybody understands, and we've seen it already across the country, when there are local outbreaks, for instance in Weston-super-Mare or in GP surgeries in North London, there have been local lockdowns, local crackdowns. We have a very effective cluster busting operation, which is designed to ensure that we keep those outbreaks under control. Local councils understand how to do it with the local resilience forums, backed up by the joint biosecurity centre. That is how it works, and that is how it is going to work, and it is a very effective way of keeping this disease under control. I'm not going to pretend to him or to the House that this thing is beaten or that the virus has gone away, because clearly that is not the case. We have to remain extremely vigilant, and local councils will be supported in doing their vital work in implementing local lockdowns.
Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I now turn to the app? This really matters because unless someone with COVID-19 can name and identify everybody they've been in contact with, the app is the only way of tracing unknown contacts. The Honourable Member for Hove made precisely that point yesterday. He gave the example of how on earth do you trace everyone in close contact at a seafront or in a park without an app. Up until last week, the government maintained that the app was critical, another of their slides. But at the weekend, the Health Secretary downplayed the app, saying it was only ever additional support. So which is it? Critical or not?
Mr. Speaker, I wonder whether the right honourable gentleman can name a single country in the world that has a functional contact tracing app, because there isn't one. What we have, and I think what has, I'm afraid, left the opposition slightly floundering, is a very successful test and trace, NHS test and trace operation, which yesterday they supported. Yesterday they said it was good enough for this country to go forward with step 3 of our plan. Today they're yo-yoing back again and saying that it's not good enough. I think they need to make up their mind. I think they need to get behind NHS test and trace and support it and take the country forward together.
Germany. App working 15th June. 12 million downloads. 12 million downloads. Mr. Speaker, I checked that overnight. 12 million is way beyond. The Health Secretary said we'd have the app by mid-May, presumably on advice. The Prime Minister said we'd have it by the 1st of June. Now the government ministers say it won't be ready until the winter. We've spent 12 million on this. Other countries are ahead of us. When are we going to have a working app?
Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid he's completely wrong, because no country in the world has a working contact tracing app, and we've always been clear that the app would be the icing on the cake. If we can get it to work, it would be a fine thing, but there isn't one anywhere in the world so far. What we do have is a fantastic test and trace, NHS test and trace operation that is already up and running, that is going to get better and better and will be indispensable to our future success. And I think he should support it, and I think, by the way, that he should be making much clearer that he supports our programme going forward. And since he mentions Labour councils and support for Labour councils, perhaps he might clear up the position of yesterday and so say once and for all that Labour councils should be encouraging children in their areas now to go back to school. Isn't it? We heard some warm words from him yesterday. Can he now confirm that he wants all children who can go back to school to go back to school this month?
Keir Starmer.
Yes, the only U-turn here was the Education Secretary on the 9th of June, who ripped up the government's plan to have children back into school before the summer break. Mr Speaker, there's a theme to these exchanges. Last week I asked the Prime Minister about 2 claims about child poverty. He said absolute child poverty and relative child poverty have both declined under this government. On Monday, the Office of the Children's Commissioner ruled that the Prime Minister's answer was mostly false. The Prime Minister also said there are 4,000 fewer families living in poverty now than there were in 2010. On Monday, the Office of the Children's Commissioner ruled that that was simply false. He's been found out. He either dodges the question or he gives dodgy answers. Mr Speaker, no more witnesses. I rest my case. Will the Prime Minister do the decent thing and correct the record in relation to child poverty?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to point out to my learned friend that actually there are 100,000 fewer children in absolute poverty, 500,000 children falling below thresholds of low income and material deprivation. This government, as he knows, is massively increasing universal credit, 7 billion more to help the poorest and neediest families in our country. We're getting on with it. We're taking the tough decisions, and he still can't make up his mind. Talking about child poverty, the single biggest determinant of a child's success is whether or not he or she goes to school. He still won't say whether children should go to school. I think, Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely infamous for him to come to this House one day and say he supports the programme, and then the next day not to confirm that he wants kids to go to school now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Seafarers, global key workers.
We will make America great again.